thank you. I am very pleased to be here with you today, although I'm talking about something which is less than pleasing. We're talking about trauma. And if we think about the lives that we are all having, we're all experiencing losses, we're all experiencing disruptions, and the differences among us are in the severity, the impact, and the support received. We are all seeing that what's important to us has been disrupted and pieces of it have been lost. And this is true for us, it's true for the people who provide the services, and it's true for the people who receive the services. If we think about those things that help us be satisfied, content, comforted, fulfilled, or happy, it starts with relationships. And one of the areas most disrupted is relationships. A virtual connection is better than no connection. And a virtual connection can keep you informed, but physical presence is part of relationship, and it's missing. It's missing for many of the people who are important to us. And those things that give us purpose and meaning may still be present, they may not. But our feeling of control over what goes on in our lives has been disrupted, and our routines in particular have been disrupted. And what we've seen in the efforts that people have made with those supported is to put those back in place, to help people have connections through Zoom, to help people have control over those aspects where control is possible, and to reestablish routines. But we're also looking at the importance of safety and the fact that feeling safe is as important as being safe. And if we think about those people who are using our services, and we think about what they're saying, I don't know about you, but I'm in quite a few Zoom meetings. I'm in quite a few meetings where we have breakout groups and where people are able to express themselves. And from some of those who live in group homes, I've heard people say, my friends, those I share my home with, leave for the hospital and they don't come back. And from those who work in those homes, I've heard people say, I'm going into people's homes. I worry about what I bring into the home and what I bring home to my family. But paradoxically, we're also hearing that some of those who use services are showing what's described as remarkable resilience. And I think as we look at this further, we'll see that that resilience in part comes from the activities that we are engaged in that help build resilience. But some of them also come from what is now not in their lives that they're happy is absent. But let's look at trauma. Most of the people who talk about trauma talk about big T and little t trauma. And big T trauma contains a number of things, but relevant for us is the loss of people. The loss of people you love, the loss of people you work with, the loss of people you live with. And part of how we cope with loss is grieving. And grieving is a collective ritual. And that capacity to go to a funeral, that capacity to talk in person, that capacity to share hugs and share tears is missing. And people can get stuck in that grieving process. And that becomes a part of trauma. But there's also something that's described as little t trauma. And if you look at this list, how does it apply to you? How many of you are no longer able to predict what's going to happen? How many of you have found that you spend a lot of time being isolated? How many of you find that being isolated has meant you're immobile? And you've experienced that loss of a sense of safety. Going to the grocery store should not be a dangerous activity. And not being able to go to the grocery store because it's dangerous is a loss. And for many, there's a loss of sense of purpose. And what we're seeing is if you put a lot of little t traumas together, if a lot of them happen with frequency, it has the same impact as big T trauma. And you wind up seeing symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. These will develop with some people later. For some people, they're already happening. We're hearing about people having strange dreams. Are they having reoccurring thoughts? Are we seeing flashbacks? Are we seeing hypervigilance? Are people developing rituals that are designed to help them cope? Are we seeing people's moods reflect a sense of impending doom? And are we seeing hyperarousal? People who are easy to startle because they're full of fear and they're now explosive. And is this developed into trauma responses, where we see a trauma trigger that results in fight, flight, or freeze? And are we seeing attachment issues? And these are all concerns and all things that we're beginning to see. So we need to think about, what are we going to do? And first, we need to expect trauma to be present. Its impact will vary, but expect it to be present. And people need to understand the causes. And when I'm saying people, I mean broadly. We need those who use services and those who provide the services begin to understand that these experiences can cause changes in how we perceive and how we behave. And that impact is both short-term and long-term. Short-term, for people who are vulnerable, though, is likely to last until there's a vaccine. So short-term is going to seem long, and long-term can be lifelong. So we need to think about, what are our responses? How do we respond? And in that short term, we need to mitigate the immediate impact. We need to think of what we can do, look at what is already happening, see if what needs to happen is present, and can we ensure that more of it is present and that it stays present. So we need to develop and support trauma-informed practices for those who are using services and those who provide them. And we need to look at how do people define safety? How do people define control? And what are supportive relationships? And make sure that that's reflected not only in the plans, but in the settings that people live in. And we need to continuously look at what's working and not working in our efforts. And as we learn that, we need to apply the learning. Well, how do we do this? To mitigate the impact, we need to teach those who are providing the support how to support grieving, how to be supportive instead of fixing, and to understand the stages of grieving so that they understand that in many instances, the anger that they see is not about them, and it's not about something that's personal. It's about the grieving process. And we need to understand those other stages and their implications. And while we're doing that, we also need to continue to build resilience. Many of the activities that I hear people putting together in the group homes are the very activities that should happen. But are we doing it with intention? And are we doing it in ways that make sure it's as broadly present as possible? And are we doing pieces of it like yoga and mindful activities? And do we understand the power of optimism and how it can help us? And are we listening? Are we listening to the people who are providing the support and addressing their concerns as best as we're able? And those people who are looking at and evaluating people who have challenging behaviors are trained to look for behavioral responses. But we need to also train them to look for a trauma response and to be able to distinguish between a trauma response and a behavioral response. And you see the differences here in this slide. And the response of the system to a behavioral issue is different than the response of the system to a trauma issue. And that needs to be something that is built in to our evaluations. And we need to recognize that treatment for PTSD needs to be something that's accessible to all of the people who are using services and many of the people who are providing them. For those people who are using services, we can look to a handful of clinicians whom some of you know, who have adapted the treatments, adapted the practices, and have effective ways that they can teach others to provide those interventions, provide those treatments, so that people can have their trauma addressed. But we also need to recognize that that's going to need to be offered for those who support, for those who provide the services, that this is going to be something much more frequently seen and will include those who are families. We're also going to need to think about healing environments. For those people who've experienced trauma, for those people who have trauma responses, they need to be in settings where they feel safe, where they have key elements of control, and they have supportive relationships. And we need to be able to look at what causes them to feel unsafe and make sure it's absent. Look for where they can have control and make sure it's present. To look at what relationships help them heal and have those relationships be in their lives. And that assumes then that we're doing trauma-informed discovery when we do our plans. We need to start asking people, what does safety mean to you? What is a safe setting like for you? Where do you need power? Where do you need control? And how do we do that in a way that is supportive and not foolish? And what connections can we help you have that contribute to healing, that contribute to your recovery? Healing environments also include being proactive about mitigation. We need to look at virtual yoga or in-person classes and mindful activities like Qigong that help people through breathing find their center, become calm, have that feeling of internal control. And we need to offer these not only to the people who use services, but to those who provide the service, to help them in these times of high stress, in these times of trauma. This means that we need to continuously look at what's working and not working in our efforts. For example, connecting through technology seems to be working remarkably well. And some of us even have Zoom fatigue. But what's not working is not everybody has the hardware, not everybody has the connection, And we are seeing this digital divide of haves and have-nots. And equipment and connections are going to need to become part of the basics that are present. We're also hearing stories of how yoga and meditation, Qigong, have worked for people. And we're seeing some people who have fewer behavioral issues. And as I mentioned earlier, this is something that we need to explore individual by individual. Is it something that was a trauma trigger that was present in the past? Was it something that they feel the need to escape that was present in the past? How can we make sure it's not present in future? Is it demand? Is it expectation? What's happening? Why is it present? And how can we use our learning to help people continue to have fewer behavioral issues in the future? And we need to recognize that many people don't feel safe. And we're seeing that the more people you live with, the more risk there is. And how do we begin to address that issue? How do we apply that learning? So if we're going to be successful, we're going to have to look at education and training, and broad education and training, so that the people who provide the services are aware of things such as how to support people who are grieving. What are the stages of grief? What does mitigation look like? What are we doing that's building resilience? How can we do more of it? And treatment needs to be widely available, not the exception, but accessible as the rule. And we need to define healing environments for each and every person and see how we can work towards them. How close can we come for each person that we support? And doing that is going to take time. Changes in policy and practice take time. Developing capacity, such as clinical skills, that takes time. And because all of this takes time, we need to start now. We need to learn from the people who are presenting after me, and we need to learn from the people who are doing the day-to-day work. And we need to start. And I want to thank you for your attention, and thank you for your time. And here's how to learn more if you wish to be in touch with me. Thank you very much.